Hello, Pokebros. I know I said I was going to make a Johto rewrite, but I wasn't really feeling it, so I decided to do this rewrite of Horizons. However, in this version, I'm creating it as if it was a normal traveling anime. On top of that, I'm not using Liko and Roy, I'm creating my own main characters. With all that intro stuff out of the way, let's hop in. We would open with an exterior shot of Los Platos. We would then zoom in on the home of Florian, an aspiring Pokémon Champion. He's up late watching a battle between Paldea's champion Gita and the previous year's Messagoza Conference winner. Both trainers were down to their last Pokemon, Gita with Kingambit and the challenger with his Meowscarada. Both trainers would call for their last moves, and the Pokemon would start charging in when the TV would suddenly turn off. Florian's mother would enter the room and would say, "Florian, you must get to bed. You don't want to be late for your first day of school tomorrow." Florian would then head to bed, not wanting to upset his mother. While sleeping, Florian would have a dream about getting his first starter, where he chooses between Sprigatito, Quaxley, and Fuecoco. Florian would then wake up the next day. However, after waking, Florian would realize that he slept in and he was going to be late for his first day of school. Florian would rush out the door, not even saying goodbye to his mother. We would then cut to outside of Narahanja and Uva Academy. The director Clavel and the two professors Sauter and Toro would be waiting outside for the four new students. The first student, a member of Uva Academy, would arrive. The girl's name is Juliana. She is here to get her first Pokemon. Clavel would send out the three starters, Sprigatito, Quaxley, and Fuecoco. Juliana would take a good look and would then decide on Fuecoco. She would thank Clavel and the professors before being given her student ID and a Pokedex. She would then head inside to her dorm. The next two students would arrive together, being Nimona and Arvin. Arvin was a student of Uva Academy, while Nimona was a student of Narahaja Academy. Nimona would pick her starter, being Sprigatito, and Arvin would then take Quaxley. Nimona would ask Arvin for a battle, but he would decline. Professor Sato would then say, "Oh, come on, son, you're going to have to battle at some point in your life." Arvin would still decline, saying that he doesn't want to risk hurting his new partner. Then Florian would come charging in, saying, "I'm not late. I've got 30 more seconds." Clavel would then say, "Thanks for finally joining us, Mr. Florian. I'm glad you can make it." Florian would apologize and would then go to pick his starter. However, Florian would soon realize that all the starters are gone. Clavel would tell Nimona and Arvin to head inside and get into their dorms. The professor would follow. Clavel would then talk to Florian, who is still in shock of what has happened. Clavel would lecture Florian, saying, "You see what happens when you don't take things seriously? You don't get the outcome you wanted." Florian would plead with Clavel, saying that he must have a Pokemon that could be his partner. Clavel would then think for a minute before saying that he thinks he does have one Pokemon that could be a perfect partner for Florian's first Pokemon. Florian would then follow Clavel to his office. After arriving, Clavel would hand Florian a Pokeball, telling him to open it up. Florian would open the ball, revealing an Eevee. Florian would be surprised, since Eevee isn't usually a starter option. Clavel would then tell Florian that this Eevee is a special Eevee. Florian would ask why, and Clavel would explain that he doesn't have the ability to evolve. Clavel would then ask Florian if he still wanted him, knowing that, and Florian would accept, saying he doesn't care if he can evolve or not as long as he's a partner Pokemon. Clavel would then say perfect, and would give Florian his Pokedex and student ID. Florian would then head to his room with Eevee. Florian would chill with Eevee for a little bit, getting to know him. One thing Florian learned real fast was that Eevee hated his Pokeball. Another thing Florian loved about Eevee was that he loved to battle. Soon Clavel would come to retrieve Florian, as it was time for his tour of the school with the rest of the new students. We would then cut to the students in the schoolyard, which is where battle classes are held. A group of students would witness a terrestrial battle between a Terra Dark Samurott and a Terra Ghost Decidueye. All of them would be in awe except for Arvin, who could only think about the Pokemon potentially getting hurt. We would then cut to the biology lab, where Jacques would be explaining to students the anatomy of Lechonk, and then the students would be taken to their respective homerooms. Arvin would get Mr. Salvatore, Juliana and Mona would get Jacques, while Florian would get Mrs. Time. Florian and Evie would then head back to their dorm to get some sleep. The next day, Florian would awake to a knocking at his door. When he opens it up, Nimona and Juliana are waiting for him. They then ask if he'll come with them to the schoolyard to battle before classes start. Florian would agree, being eager for his first battling experience. After arriving, Florian would hop right into battle with Nimona. She would use her Sprigatito while Florian used Eevee. Nimona would start the battle by calling for a leafage, and Eevee would be hit head-on. Florian would then order Eevee to use a quick attack. Eevee would charge in, but Nimona would order Sprigatito to dodge and then retaliate with a scratch that would land, doing big damage. Florian would start to feel a little flustered. He would then tell Eevee to use Bite. He would charge him with the attack, but Sprigatito would dodge again, then landing a leaf edge, taking Eevee out. Florian would then go pick up Eevee to make sure he's okay. Eevee would give him a nod, and Florian would realize that he still has a lot to learn. Nimona and Juliana would continue to battle, but Florian would decide to head to the nurse to get Eevee healed. After arriving, the nurse would greet Florian and would ask why he was up so early. He would then explain that he was doing some practice battling. After getting Eevee back, Florian would head to his first class. In his first class, Florian would meet Penny. Penny was on the shy side, but Florian's kindness and charm would break through her tough outer shell. In class, Florian would learn about basic type matchups like grass over water, water over fire, and fire over grass. Despite this being basic knowledge, this really helped Florian, who had no idea. Miss Time would then tell the class that they are heading for the schoolyard for their first terrestrial training against Mr. Salvatore's class. Florian and the rest of the class would then make it to the schoolyard. Miss Time would get the terrestrial battle set up. The first fight would be Penny versus a girl from Arvin's class named Dot. Dot would send in Sobble, while Penny would send in an Umbreon. Both would then terrestrialize their Pokemon, with Sobble staying water and Umbreon staying dark. Dot would call for a water gun, and it would hit Umbreon head-on. Penny would then order a Dark Pulse, and Sobble would barely be able to dodge. Penny would then order a Bite, and Umbreon would charge in, chomping down on Sobble's head. Sobble would be in a lot of pain. However, Sobble would then power up her water gun into a Water Pulse and would knock Umbreon back. Penny would then order a Quick Attack, and Umbreon would charge in, taking Sobble out. Penny would then congratulate Dot, saying she did a great job. The next battle would be Florian versus Arvin. Florian would use Eevee, and Arvin would use Quaxley. When Arvin terrestrialized, Quaxley would stay water, but surprisingly, when Eevee terrestrialized, he would turn into a fighting type. Arvin would go for a water gun, but Eevee would dodge. Florian would think for a second, but would then call for a double kick since it's boosted by Terra. The attack would land, doing decent damage to Quaxley. Florian would then tell Eevee to use a sand attack. He would do so, blinding the Quaxley. Florian would then tell Eevee to go for another double kick, putting Quaxley on the edge of fainting. Arvin would then order Quaxley to charge him with an Oxyjet. Eevee would try to dodge, but he wouldn't be fast enough. The Aqua Jet would land, doing pretty big damage. Florian would then say, Eevee, let's finish this, before calling for a quick attack. Eevee would charge in, and the attack would land, taking Quaxley out. Florian would cheer for his first win, and he would thank Arvin for the battle. Miss Time and Mr. Salvatore would then tell the class it is time to head back to homeroom. Florian would then make his way back to class. In the second half of the day, Miss Time would talk to the class about battle strategies such as Trick Room, using screen, set up moves like Swords Dance, and entry hazards like Toxic Spikes. However, when Miss Time was teaching, Florian was daydreaming about battling the champion, so he didn't retain much. Penny would try to snap him out of it, but it wouldn't be any help. The bell would then ring, waking Florian. Florian would then head for his dorm so he could get some sleep. The next day, Florian would wake to a knock at the door again. When he opens it up, Penny would be on the other side. She would tell Florian that Clavel is giving a speech in the schoolyard. Florian and Penny would then rush over there. They would get there just as the speech was starting. Clavel would introduce the treasure hunt, the school's main way of letting students meet and bond with Pokemon. He would explain that all students will set out to explore Paldea, and they will try to find their own treasure. Whether it's becoming champion or cooking food, Clavel will be happy as long as the students find something that they love. Hearing this, Florian would get excited since he now finally has his chance to take on the league. All the students would then disperse as they are ready to set off on their treasure hunt. Florian would then head back to his dorm to get his things together. While there, Arvin and Penny would come into his room. Florian would ask why they were there, and they would reveal that they would both like to travel with Florian on their treasure hunt. Florian would ask why, and Penny would reveal that she enjoyed hanging out with Florian, unlike most other kids. And Arvin would say that after the battle they had, he thinks Florian is strong enough to where he wouldn't have to battle. Florian would understand both of their reasons and would accept to travel with them. They would then head in front of the school ready to set off on their journey. However, right before the trio could set off, Juliana would stop Florian. Florian would ask why she stopped him, and she would challenge Florian to a battle to see who was the stronger trainer from Los Platos. Florian would accept, feeling confident after his win over Arvin. Florian would send out Eevee while Juliana would send out her Fuecoco. Juliana would call for an Ember and Eevee would get hit. Florian would then tell Eevee to charge him with a quick attack. Eevee would do so, but Juliana would call for a round, bouncing Eevee back. Florian would then call for a sand attack. This would blind Fuecoco and Florian would use his opening to call for a bite. This attack would land, doing decent damage to Fuecoco. Juliana would then call for a bite of her own and Fuecoco would chomp down on Eevee's head. Florian would then tell Eevee to use a double kick to help break free of the bite. This strategy would work, freeing Eevee. Both trainers would then decide to terrestrialize their Pokemon, with Eevee turning into a fighting type and Fuecoco staying a fire type. Juliana would call for an Ember, and Florian would order Eevee to dodge with a quick attack. Eevee would then charge him with a double kick. However, Fuecoco would dodge both, then strike him with a Terra-boosted Ember, taking Eevee out. Florian would run out to Eevee to make sure he's okay. Eevee would give Florian a nod. Florian would then thank Juliana for the battle. Arvin and Penny would check in on Florian, making sure he's okay, and he would say he's fine. Our trio would then set off on their treasure hunt. That's all for today, Pokeheroes. This episode wasn't as action-packed as some episodes, but it was more to set up the story that I'll be following. Let me know how you like Florian and the other characters. Also, comment on the video any Paldean Pokemon you think Florian should capture. If you have any suggestions or criticisms, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye, Pokebros.